Cuban government formally responds to the shooting attack on its embassy in Washington. A shocking number of COVID-19 deaths in Canada have been linked to long-term care homes. And Nicaragua honors National Liberation Hero Tomas Borge Martinez. Hello and welcome to Telesur English. I am Estefania Bravo in Quito, Ecuador. This is from the south. Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez held a news conference to address the shooting attack on its embassy in the U.S., for which the government of Cuba continues to seek answers.
I have expressed my surprise that more than 12 hours have passed since the attack on our embassy, and the official authorities of the United States government and the State Department have not been in contact with our authorities. They have not made official statements, not even tweets, which have become so frequent, referencing Cuba by the United States officials and its embassy. At the time of the attack, here were a dozen diplomatic mission personnel present who were put in danger. We appreciate the professional conduct of the officials of the law enforcement agencies, who quickly attended the site of the act. The individual's identity has not been made known to the government of Cuba. He was arrested at the location of the crime, and he is now in custody.
Minister Rodriguez framed the act within the context of the ongoing U.S. blockade and the history of acts of terrorism carried out against Cuba from the United States.
It's impossible to disassociate an act like this from the upsurge of the policies of aggression and hostility which the government of the United States applies against Cuba, nor the hardening of the blockade, which includes non-conventional measures, including during the COVID-19 pandemic, which includes the entire planet. I recall that within the United States, there operate and there have operated with impunity throughout the years groups of individuals who have in the past committed terrorist acts against Cuba, which is well known to law enforcement agencies of the government of the United States. I urge the Department of State to adopt with the utmost urgency the necessary measures to fully comply with its responsibilities under the Vienna Convention and to guarantee the full security of the Cuban embassy, the United Nations permanent missions in New York, and the personnel of both missions and their accompanying family members. Finally, I offer the cooperation of the Cuban authorities to carry out the corresponding investigation.
As International Workers' Day approaches, the people of Cuba are saying the best way to celebrate the date is to help eradicate COVID-19. We have more in this report.
COVID-19 has changed the daily routines of Cubans. This barbershop, for example, has become a workshop to produce protective masks.
I had to close down my business temporarily, so I started thinking how I could help my country and what we are going through. So I remember I had a sewing machine somewhere in the back, so I got to work.
Due to the spread of the novel coronavirus, Cubans are coming together with similar initiatives as the island has found it hard to acquire protective supplies due to the economic blockade spearheaded by the U.S.
I sometimes see people who have poorly made masks, so I give them better ones. Or I hear about people who don't have any mask. Maybe they live alone or are older people, so I make sure someone takes it to them.
This young entrepreneur has reinvented his business and is using the quarantine to help build a better community.
What he's doing is good, usually women who sew, who create, but this young man found inspiration in these difficult times. He's improving himself thanks to his altruism.
As Cuba approaches its peak of infections with over 1,400 cases, the nation is looking for strategies to overcome the crisis.
Moving on, Venezuelan Foreign Minister Jorge Arreaza has condemned the violation of international law by the government of Brazil. The foreign minister took to Twitter to denounce the intention of the government of Brazil to force the Venezuelan diplomatic and consular personnel out of the country before May the 2nd, alleging transactions that have never been concluded. Arreaza announced that the diplomatic personnel will not be leaving their duties and advised that the only purpose of the government of Brazil is to, quote, fool the country's public opinion in order to hide their open subordination to the U.S. government. It's been 1 year since the Venezuelan opposition sought to overthrow the government of President Nicolás Maduro in a coup. Its defeat reinforced the institutionality of the country.
On April 30th, 2019, opposition politicians, along with a group of military personnel, attempted to carry out a coup which in less than 6 hours was extinguished, and which has since been catalogued as a new failure of this political sector. 1 year later, 7 out of 10 Venezuelans are against the toppling of President Nicolás Maduro, and his government has the support of 85% of citizens when it comes to leading the management of the pandemic, according to figures released by the pollster Hinterlaces.
The situation with the pandemic in the country has shown that the strategy of dual power, of the double presidency, has almost no meaning, no impact on reality, since it is not possible to attend to social needs through any other figure than the constitutionally elected one, or the one who is effectively in power.
In accordance with analysts, following those events of April 30th, the opposition was left fragmented, and the leaders of the uprising now face investigations and charges. Further, after the failed coup, negotiations began sponsored by Norway, and subsequently another round of negotiations by Barbados, and finally a national dialogue table between the government and sectors of the opposition, which continue today.
A division took place between sectors that promote violent, insurrectionary, armed solutions to the political conflict, and on the other hand, a more democratic opposition, which seeks a negotiated solution and dialogue.
The United States has openly machined a regime change strategy on Venezuela, but within just a year, the balance remains in favor of the policies of the Bolivarian Revolution. Foreign Minister Arreaza said this in a tweet.
Let's imagine that in 2019, the right-wing coup would have triumphed, a government that underestimates the pandemic, allied with Trump, Bolsonaro, Duque, expels Cuban doctors, eliminates club boxes and barrio adentro, rejects help from China, Russia, and the WHO, privatizes the integral diagnostic centers, and charges for the diagnostic test.
Since the COVID-19 emergency began, the main U.S.-backed opposition sector has not made a credible response in the eyes of citizens. That's in addition to their promotion of the economic problems generated by the blockade, which they themselves support.
The control of the territory, the leadership of the country, are in the hands of President Maduro, who is dealing with the pandemic firsthand. It is the national government with whom the humanitarian and international organizations communicate and have an understanding with.
According to the Hinterlaces survey, 81% of the population is in disagreement with the sanctions, and 78% believes that the efforts of the United States have been negative for the country. And even while being the epicenter of the COVID-19 outbreak, the White House has not halted its siege on Miraflores.
We'll take a short break now. Join us again in a minute. Welcome back to From the South. More news now. Trinidad and Tobago is making headway in its fight against the novel coronavirus with no new cases in 4 days. Thus far, 116 people have tested positive and 72 others have recovered. 6 cases remain active, while 8 people have died from the respiratory illness.
The total number of tests done to date, 1,683. Total number of unique patient tests, 1,376. Total number of repeated tests, 307. Total number of positive cases stands the same at 116. Total number of discharges, 72. Total number of deaths, thankfully, have remained the same at 8. 7 in Trinidad, 1 in Tobago. Total number of hospitalized patients has dropped from 9 to 6, and all 6 are in Cuba. There's no one in either the intensive care unit or the high dependency unit. No one is on a ventilator. All 6 are mild, asymptomatic patients, and we wish them the best going forward for their discharge.
Jamaica has recorded 32 positive COVID-19 cases in 48 hours, taking the country's total to 396.
So far, we have done some 3,993 samples we have collected and tested. Of the 3,993 tested to date, in addition to the 396 positives, 3,567 are negative and 30 are pending. There are 385 persons in isolation and 89 in quarantine in a government facility. 7 persons have died, 29 persons have recovered.
In an address to the nation on Wednesday, Barbados Prime Minister Mia Mottley has advised the population that there will be a revision of the country's lockdown measures. The 24-hour stay-at-home order is to revert to an overnight curfew from Monday as government moves to a staged reopening of its offices and businesses.
I wish to stress that this initiative to ease restrictions is being guided by the best advice from our health professionals regarding infections on the island and other relevant data. Against this background, effective Monday, May the 4th, next Monday, the following will pertain. 1. Those government offices which have been functioning over the curfew period will continue to do so with their regular staff numbers. These include the General Post Office, the National Insurance Department, and the Customs and Excise Department and Immigration Departments. Other government entities which provide functions deemed critical at this time will recommence operations with regular staffing complements to provide full services.
4 out of 5 COVID-19 deaths in Canada are linked to long-term care homes for the elderly, shedding light into very strong allegations. Telesur's special contributor Pablo Vivanco in Toronto has more.
With 4 and 5 COVID-19 deaths in Canada being linked to long-term care homes, a new report stemming from legal actions by unions has shed light into why this may be occurring in those type of facilities. Last week, the SEIU and the Ontario Nurses Association secured court orders against a number of private long-term care homes, and some of the allegations in the court orders published in reports yesterday were quite damning. These included that staff were allegedly hiding dead bodies, as well as that certain residents that had tested positive for COVID-19 were not only not being separated from healthy residents, but in some cases were sharing rooms with healthy residents. In addition, nurses operating in spaces that have been designated as high-risk contagion zones were denied proper, adequate safety equipment. There are over 51,000 confirmed cases of COVID-19 in Canada and just under 3,000 deaths to date. On the national stage, opposition parties have also been pushing Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to not give emergency aid to companies operating tax havens, and have appeared to have secured that pledge from the Prime Minister this week. However, there is speculation now, given some of the proceedings in the House of Commons yesterday, that the Prime Minister may try to walk back from that pledge to lawmakers.
We thank Pablo Vivanco for that report. There is growing concern in Honduras over recent state purchases of medical equipment, as many claim authorities overpaid for the supplies. We have more in this report.
In March, President Juan Orlando Hernandez approved the use of close to $25 million for the purchase of medical equipment to face the COVID-19 pandemic.
We will invest 643 million lempiras to buy medical supplies and equipment. as well as mobile hospitals that are on the way to our country.
But the state's top financial court recently spoke about irregularities in the purchase of face masks, which were overvalued at more than 50%. Experts agree this is yet more proof of rampant corruption in Honduras.
Corruption remains a major issue, and recent developments have made it more apparent. A few months ago, a study already established that corruption accounted for a loss of between 30 to 40 billion of the national budget.
Tents that were bought to be passed off as hospitals in the north of Honduras were also overvalued and have already been abandoned.
This has no precedent. We have already compared this to a slow-moving genocide, but now its massive corruption must be dealt with.
While the main culprit behind the overpayment has already resigned, there are still no legal processes underway, as they will allegedly start following the crisis.
Once the health emergency is over, they must do a rear audit to find out how this was allowed to happen. If this audit finds their civil or criminal responsibility, a report must be made to relevant authorities.
The Honduras Medical Association also denounced the purchase of equipment that is ill-suited to confront the global pandemic.
We'll take a short break now. Join us again in a minute. Welcome back to From the South. More news now. We now take a look at the bizarre case of a woman in Ecuador who was erroneously declared dead by health authorities after they mixed her medical history with that of another patient.
One of the most impactful stories to hit Ecuador in recent days is that of 74-year-old Alba Maruri, who was admitted to a hospital in Guayaquil due to the complication with her diabetes. Hours after being admitted, doctors told her relatives that she had passed away due to COVID-19. But a month later, authorities from the health ministry were forced to seek out Alba's family to let them know she was actually alive.
Authorities from the health ministry came to us, and we thought they needed some document they forgot about, but they told us it wasn't about that. They said Alba Maruri Granada did not die. She is alive. We were taken aback, but they insisted she was alive. We were in shock. Our skin was crawling. We had already cremated her. We had the ashes at home. How could this be? They said it was a mistake due to the chaos at the hospital since the health system collapsed in the city.
The city of Guayaquil is still the epicenter of the novel coronavirus in Ecuador, and Alba's story is just another tale of government abandonment in times of crisis. For the time being, Alba's relatives are not considering taking legal action, but they demand she receives proper care.
We want our aunt to be calm and to be treated by the doctors. We want them to be careful and to pay attention to her. They've already shown great negligence towards her, so the least we expect is that our aunt is sent home okay.
The Ombudsman Office says that from March 20 until April 20, there have been over 4,000 complaints in relation to the government's response to the pandemic. According to the Ombudsman, one of the biggest mistakes has been a lack of transparency in the information provided by the state.
Without proper information, how can people be calm and how can rights be guaranteed? Especially the right to health. How can they appease those who lost loved ones? On top of complaints that hospitals are running with no budget, that there are no tests. Even health professionals have no stability to speak of. Many of them were given short-term contracts, and they are giving their lives. These are errors made by an administration that doesn't accept the magnitude of this pandemic.
The Ombudsman added that the government passing on the buck to mayors shows they did not know how to handle the crisis. President Lenin Moreno has already announced that starting on May 4th, the country can move from quarantine to social distancing, and the local authorities must decide which cities will ease restrictions.
Russian Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin says he tested positive for coronavirus and will self-isolate to protect other cabinet members.
I've just learned that I've tested positive for the novel coronavirus. Following orders from the Rostropnadzor, I have to be self-isolated and follow medical advice. It's necessary to ensure the safety of my colleagues. The government will continue its normal operations. I am planning to stay in touch with my colleagues and with you via telephone and video call on all general matters. Andrei Removich Belousov will act as Prime Minister.
Spain's Health Ministry Emergencies Coordinator has announced that the country has counted another 268 people who have died from the coronavirus, the lowest daily number since March 20th, as the country prepares to ease its tough lockdown measures.
We know that the number of new deaths reported since yesterday evening was 268. This is the second lowest figure since the exponential increase of the epidemic began. 268 is the second time, moreover, that the number has fallen below 300 in recent days.
France has received a new shipment of masks from China, a new shipment of about 10 million masks, including FFP2 and surgical masks, arrived at Roissy Airport just outside of Paris on Thursday. France's Prime Minister Edouard Philippe has announced the country will begin a gradual return to normality from May 11th, with shops, markets, and some schools reopening and the wearing of masks compulsory on public transport. To Africa now, where the renegade Libyan General Khalifa Haftar says that his forces will cease hostilities for Ramadan. The announcement to halt military operations from Haftar's side came following international calls for a truce, particularly during the Muslim holy month. Other recent ceasefires have been unsuccessful. Haftar controls areas of eastern and southern Libya, a country riddled with conflict since the killing of African revolutionary leader Muammar al-Gaddafi in 2011. For now, South Africa remains in a nationwide lockdown, but football training continues in some neighborhoods. Johannesburg Amajadananda Football Club carries on with training in an ally in the township of Alexandra. The coach says the idea is to keep players busy so that they can hit the ground running when the league eventually resumes.
Basically now I'm training the boys just to keep them fit and avoiding to get them into wrong things, so at least to keep them fit so that when the league resumes, so we on par. Playing sports will help them a lot, moving away from drugs, alcohol, and sports will keep them away from those things.
Because we never stopped playing, but since there's this lockdown, we've been staying at home, which is something unusual.
It is important because we just sit around at home doing nothing, so we're just keeping busy and keeping our bodies healthy and ourselves to do something other than just sitting and eating and just watching TV.
Nicaragua remembers National Liberation hero Tomas Borge Martinez today on the 8th anniversary of his passing. As one of the co-founders of the Sandinista National Liberation Front, Tomas Borge was always confident that the revolution would triumph over the dictatorship. And despite being imprisoned many times, he stayed loyal to the revolutionary forces, never surrendering information nor dignity to his torturers. A special National Assembly session is being held in the city of Matagalpa, the birthplace of Commander Tomas Borge, in his honor. And with that, we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And be sure to follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Estefania Bravo. Until next time.